Hey everybody, and welcome back to another fun and exciting intermediate math class. Today we'll be jumping into chapter number 6. That's awesome because when we finish chapter number 6, we will be halfway through this book and you will be halfway done with this course. So keep on working hard and do your best on these lessons. All right, look at page 214 in your book. 214. Have a lot of information to cover here. It's not really hard information, but it's a lot of information. So kind of keep up, pay attention both in your book there and on the screen. All right, we're going to be doing in chapter number 6, we're going to be doing measurements. And specifically in this lesson, we'll be doing U.S. customary measurements. U.S. customary measurements are based on the English measurement system. There's really two that we use. There's the English and the metric. A lot of countries, in fact, most of the rest of the world uses the metric system. In the United States, we use the English system, or now it's called the U.S. customary system. Biggest things that you need to know is you just need to memorize these things, all right? And I know it's hard to memorize, but most of you, this is not the first time that you've seen this. So what I would do if I was you is in your book, they're listed, or here on the screen, I would write these down and I would work on memorizing. I would make sure that I know all of these. 1 foot, abbreviated FT, equals 12 inches, IN. 1 yard, YD, equals 3 feet, 36 inches. Now, that one's pretty easy to quantify because we've all seen a ruler before. And so when you have a ruler, you have 1 foot. Well, there's 12 inches on that ruler. If you had 3 rulers and you put 3 rulers next to each other, then you would have 1 yard. This one's a little bit harder to quantify, and that is the 1 mile, because, we can't see 1 mile. We can, I guess, kind of see it when we're driving in a car or something, but 1 mile is a long ways. If you took 5,280 rulers and you stacked them all up end to end, that would be 1 mile. Okay? So it's also 1,760 yards. The next one is units of weight. How much does something weigh? How heavy is something? So 1 pound, abbreviated LB. That's interesting. Why is it abbreviated LB? I didn't know the answer to this until I learned Spanish. When I learned Spanish, I was like, oh, that makes sense now. The word for pound in Spanish is libra. So libra, LB, libra. And so it's a Latin-based abbreviation. So you just have to memorize that. You have to memorize that the pound is abbreviated LB. Ounces, 16 ounces, OZ, that kind of makes sense. Ounces with a Z instead of a C. Just OZ, you kind of have to remember that that is ounces. And then 1 ton is abbreviated T, and that equals 2,000 pounds. A ton is very, very heavy. Most of you, again, can quantify this in your minds because you kind of know what a pound weighs, more or less. You pick something up and you're like, okay, that's about 3 pounds, or, you have those little weights that you work out with, and okay, that's 10 pounds, or that's 30 pounds, or that's 100 pounds, whatever. So you can kind of understand what a pound weighs. Ounces are a little bit harder because we don't pick something up and say, oh, that weighs about 3 ounces. It's really hard, so we have to weigh that. We have to have a scale of some sort to be able to weigh ounces. And then a ton would be very, very hard to figure out too because it's 2,000 pounds. You just know that it's really heavy. So you'd have to have a big scale to weigh something that weighed in the tons. Maybe like a scale. Maybe you've gone to the garbage dump before and you had to drive onto the scale. They weigh your car. You throw all your trash off, and then you come back and they weigh your car again, and then they charge you based on how much your car still weighs. So in other words, they charge you on how much garbage you got rid of when you were in the dump. That scale that you drive on would be weighing in tons, or technically it would weigh in pounds, but it could weigh in tons as well because it can weigh heavy things. So maybe you've seen that before. Measures of capacity. Again, these are all in your book. Page 215 is where these ones are listed. Page 215. So there's two different types of capacity measurements. Capacity means how much can something hold? How much can you put inside of something? There are liquid measurements, so if you're putting liquid inside of something, and then there's dry measurements. Let's say you're putting fruit inside of something or vegetables, something like that. So there's two different ways to measure capacity. Let's start with liquid. 1 pint, PT, equals 2 cups, C. 1 quart, QT, equals 2 pints. Notice these two are connected, right? So you get to pints to cups and quarts to pints. So what happens, and we'll talk about this later, but what happens if I need to go from quarts, if I'm converting something, and I need to go from quarts to cups? I don't know the measurement that goes from quarts to cups, but I do know the measurement that goes from quarts to pints. And then I do know the measurement that goes from pints to cups. So I could get from quarts to cups, but I'd have to go through pints. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, we'll work on that in a little bit. But you have to realize that some of these are connected. Okay? Gallons to quarts. Again, look, we could go all the way from gallons to cups. I could go from gallons to quarts, from quarts to pints, and from pints to cups. So we can make multi-step connections here when we're dealing, especially in liquid measurements. There's other ones that we can do that with, but especially in measurements. 1 tablespoon, those are the bigger, the big spoons that maybe you eat like your cereal with because you love getting a lot of cereal, right? The big spoon, okay, that's called a tablespoon. And 1 tablespoon equals 3 of the small spoons, teaspoons. Now, those aren't exact measurements. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that those are exact. But that's kind of a basically the idea. The big spoon is a tablespoon and the little spoon is a teaspoon. 1 fluid ounce equals 2 tablespoons. So if the recipe that you're making calls for 2 tablespoons of something, it's calling for 1 fluid ounce of something. Or if it calls for 1 fluid ounce, it's calling for 2 tablespoons. So you could actually measure it in tablespoons if it uses fluid ounce, if you don't have like a cup or something that measures in fluid ounces. The next one, 1 cup equals 8 fluid ounces. Notice I just went with the abbreviations here because I already told you what cups equals. Cups is C. So now instead of using cups, I'm using C, so you can get used to that. 1 cup equals 8 fluid ounces, and then 1 pint equals 16 fluid ounces. In the dry measurements, we have 1 quart equals 2 pints. Those are just like the liquid ones, right? We have quarts and pints. So quarts and pints right here. So 1 quart equals 2 pints. 1 quart equals 2 pints. But they look a little different when they're dry measurements just because of the way that is. So dry quarts and dry pints are different than liquid quarts and liquid pints. And that's basically for recipes when you're doing things, you need to know that. 1 peck, PK, equals 8 quarts. A peck is just a different way to measure dry goods. A lot of times you see this in vegetables or fruits. Like you buy a peck of strawberries or a quart of strawberries. You buy this next one, bushel. You buy a bushel of apples, let's say. So a lot of times when we're dealing with grains, fruits, vegetables, we're going to be dealing with these dry units of measurement. All right, and now, so that's basically all of the different English measurements. Now, what do we do when we need to convert those or go in between two different measurements? When going from larger measurements to smaller measurements. Now, look at my face right here. Okay, look at my face. When you're going from larger measurements, I'm gonna do this, all right? So I'm going from large measurements and I'm going to smaller measurements. I'm going to multiply. Do you see what I did there? That was crazy, right? All right, let me blow it up here just a little bit so you can see it. All right. So when I'm going from large measurements, something big, to something small, I multiply. That's a multiplication sign right there, okay? Larger to smaller, multiply. Now watch. If I'm going from small, okay, to large, and you won't really be able to see this one, but I divide, okay, I'm making a division symbol. Let's get my arms right out there. Let's pretend like you can see that, okay? So I make a division sign. My head is the top dot, right? Okay, the division sign, whatever. So you make a division sign. So make sure that you know that. Write that down. That's important, and make sure that you remember that. If I'm going from smaller to larger, I divide. If I'm going from larger to smaller, I multiply. Okay? And that's what I've written right here. When going from larger measurements to smaller measurements, multiply by the conversion factor. When going from smaller measurements to larger measurements, divide by the conversion factor. Don't let this word right here, mess you up. What's a conversion factor? A conversion factor is what we just went over. These are conversions. Pints to cups, that's a conversion. Okay? So let's do a couple of these, and then I will let you do some on your own. 2 miles equals how many yards? Well, I don't know. I know how many 1 mile equals, but I don't know how many 2 miles equals. Because look, when we go up here, we have 1 mile equals 1,760 yards. So I know that. So let's go back to the question. I'm going from miles. Miles are big, right? To yards. Yards are small. I'm multiplying. Bigger, smaller, multiply. So I am multiplying 2 times my conversion factor, 1,760. So let's just go ahead and multiply that out. It gives us 3,520. So the answer would be 3,520. And it's that easy. All you do is follow those two little steps. Larger to smaller, multiply. Smaller to larger, divide. And multiply and divide by the conversion factor that we just learned in those charts. 32 ounces equals how many pounds? Well, let's go back up to ounces and pounds. Here we go. In the weights, so ounces and pounds. 1 pound equals 16 ounces. So let's go back down here. So now we're going from ounces. Ounces are small. Pounds are big. We're going to divide. So we're going to divide 32 by our conversion factor. What's our conversion factor? 16 ounces in a pound. So 16 goes into 32 2 times. So 32 is 0. So our answer is 2. 32 ounces equals 2 pounds. Just multiply or divide based on larger to smaller, smaller to larger. The next is the multi-step problem that I talked about just a little bit earlier. So when we have multi-step, that means that we're going from like gallons to cups, for example. When we're doing that, we have to pass through or use kind of like a bridge to get to where we want to go. Notice this problem. We're going from pints to gallons. If we go back to our conversion factor on this, pints to gallons. Look, we don't have one that goes from pints to gallons. We have quarts to pints, and we have gallons to quarts. So notice that both of these share quarts. So we need to go through the quart to get to the gallon. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So what we want to do is we want to go from 80 pints equals blank quarts. And then we want to go to blank quarts, whatever we get there. Basically, we're going to put that there, equals blank gal. All right. Sorry, I had to squeeze that in right there. All right. So that's the question. All right. That's the $1 million question, right? That's what we're trying to do. So let's go back and look at our conversions. So we want pints to quarts first. So what's our conversion for pints to quarts? 1 quart equals 2 pints. Which one's bigger, pints or gallons? We're going from smaller to larger, divide. So our conversion factor from pints to quarts was 2. Okay? So we're going to divide this by 2. So we're going to do 80 divided by 2 is 40. So 80 pints equals 40 quarts. And then we're going to take that 40 and we're going to put it right here, because now we're going from quarts to gallons. That's what we want to get to. 40 quarts equals how many gallons? I don't know. How many quarts are in a gallon? I don't know. Let's go look at it real quick and see what we need. So quarts, gallon, 4 quarts in a gallon. So that's our conversion fact. So again, we're going from quarts, smaller, to gallons, larger, smaller, larger, divide. So we're dividing again. So we're going divide 40 by 4, because that's how many quarts are in a gallon. 4 quarts in a gallon, so we're going to divide by 4. And that's going to give us 10. So our answer would be 10 gallons. A little bit hard to see there. I'll recircle that. There you go. 10 gallons. And so that's how you do it. Yeah, a little bit longer lesson, I guess. A lot of material packed in there, but hopefully you learned something there. Hopefully you were able to kind of follow that and understand those conversions. It's very simple once you kind of put that together in your mind. Larger, smaller, multiply. Smaller, larger, divide. Okay? Get that in your mind. Actually do that. I've actually had students that I see them in the test. They're like, and so they're working that out. That's perfect. That's fine. I want you to do that because that's going to help you remember it when you go to do these on your quizzes and your test. Okay? That's all I've got for you. Hope you learned something. Have a good one. Bye-bye.